All right, I have turned on recording. So this afternoon, Jeff Bohn, one of our directors and trustees for many, many years, longer than I've been on the board, has graciously agreed to share some of his knowledge about the accountancy marks on mail from the 1840s and 1850s. Is that the right period, Jeff?
Well, for this presentation, just
Yes.
1852.
Very good. And I've had a chance to sneak preview the slide presentation, which is pretty darn interesting. So without further ado, Jeff, I will let you take over. And as I usually do, I'm going to mute everybody and you will have to unmute yourself to talk to us. So here we go. Everybody is muted. Jeff, you need to unmute.
Okay,
We can hear you.
and share screen.
You should be able to do that. And tell it to start this. There we go.
There we go. Okay, now how do I get rid of the, oh, here we go. I'm gonna get rid of all those too. So, okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Bohn, and I've been collecting information on Franco-British accountancy markings probably since 1970. And over all those years, I've accumulated some information on some, I guess what I would call experimental accountancy markings that were issued and used in August of 1852. And I finally got to the point where I thought maybe I should, consolidate what I've learned and put it into a format that others can hopefully take advantage of. So I have to admit that this presentation may be pretty wordy from the standpoint there's probably more information on, word information on the slides than pictures of covers, but hopefully by the end you can understand why that might be. So let's see. I'm going to go to the first slide, and there's going to be a little background information here. I'm indicating that one of the earliest Franco-British postal conventions, the one I'm interested in, went into effect on the 1st of June, 1843. And it outlined regulations for the exchange of mails between France and the United Kingdom. And within the convention, a system of debits and credits was established for the exchange of mails. And that information was included on letter bills that accompanied each bag of mail. So the letter bills were basically sheets of paper that were divided into the various categories. There was a category of mail for paid, for unpaid mail, for registered mail, for printed matter, and so on. And each of the entries into the letter bill was designated by a separate article number. So here's a sample of the letter bill from the 1843 convention. And this only had to do, this portion, this table number 2, only had to do with unpaid letters, okay? And we can see on the left the numbers of articles in the letter bill, not the articles in the convention, but the articles actually on the letter bills. And we can see Article 9 was for unpaid letters sent from the United Kingdom for France, the Mediterranean countries and German states. Article 10 was from Jersey and Guernsey, 11 from Jamaica, Canada, and so on. And Article 12 from other colonies and countries beyond sea. Okay, then in the column over here, we see the rates per ounce. So on letters from Canada and provinces, the exchange rate between England and France was set at 4 shillings per ounce. Okay, that's the rate per ounce. Individual letters were rated by the portion to England was divided by 4. So on letters from the Canadian provinces, those letters would have had a debit from England to France of 1 shilling per ounce. Letters from colonies and countries beyond the sea, which included the United States and most other origins at this time, were exchanged under Article 12 of the letter bill, and the exchange rate was 3 shillings, 4 pence per ounce, or 40 pence. So 40 pence divided by 4 was 10 pence. So a single weight letter from England, unpaid, from England to France that originated in one of the colonies would have been debited 10 pence per quarter ounce. So that's the original letter bill, a portion of it under 1843 convention. So within the Articles of Execution, there was a section in section, let's see, 57, that said, in order that there be no confusion between letters coming from those British possessions, which are to be accounted for at the rate of 4 shillings per ounce, and those coming from other British possessions or countries beyond sea, such letters shall be marked on their face with a special stamp as below. So for those from North America, the Canadian provinces, those unpaid letters would have received an accountancy marking, as we call them. Basically said Canada, Article 11 on the letter bill. Those from colonies and countries beyond the sea would have got this hand stamp referencing Article 12 on the letter bill. Now, originally, these were the only 2 accountancy markings that were introduced under the 1843 convention. Some of the other things that we noted on the previous letter bill, even though they were included on the letter bill, they really received no accountancy markings. So the next one said, okay, so here's an example of a letter, 1843 from unpaid from Toronto, sent to Lyon, and it was carried by British packet to England and then forwarded into France under Article 11 of the letter bill. So the London Foreign Office, upon receipt of this letter, applied the accountancy marking Canada and Colonies Article 11. And then on arrival in France, postage due of 32 decimes was required to pay the 12 decime or the 1 shilling fee to England, plus the French internal postage of 20 decimes. Okay, for a letter weighing between 7.5 and 10 grams. This little kind of looks like a W, but that was one of the ways that the French indicated that this was more than a single weight letter, but not quite a double weight letter. So this letter weighed somewhere between 7.5 grams and 10 grams. If it would have been over 10 grams, then they would have rated it as a double weight letter. Okay, now on letters from the United States and from other British colonies and undesignated overseas countries, unpaid letters were exchanged under Article 12 of the letter bill. And here we see an 1845 letter from New York was locally paid, but that had carried no weight with regard to the letters sent to France. It just paid the US internal postage. And when it got to England, the London office applied this colonies and countries Article 12. It's kind of a poor strike. So there's a 1 and there's the 2, but difficult to see. And under Article 12, England only got 10 pence per quarter ounce. And so again, we have this marking indicated that the letter weighed could have weighed more than 7.5 grams, and so it was double weight within France, but only single weight in England. So only 20 decimes was collected on delivery. Okay, so Now, in the beginning of 1846, there was a change in the letter bills. The same categories of mails were here. The same exchange rates remained the same, but now letters from the Canadian provinces, from Jamaica and the Canadian provinces, were now exchanged under Article 12 of the letter bill. Those from other British colonies and countries beyond the sea were now exchanged under Article 13. So there was no change in the exchange rate, but there was a change in the location of these categories on the letter bill. And so now we have new accountancy markings. We have letters from Canada, which were now exchanged under Article 12 of the letter bill. And here we see Canada and Colonies, Article 12. And the rate was still the same as before, 4 shillings per 30 grams, but a single weight letter was divided by 4, and that was now 1 shilling or 12 decimes. And the French internal postage at this time was 5 decimes per 7.5 grams. So now we see the total postage due of 17, 10 for Great Britain, 5 for France internal. And this was in June of 1852. And here we see a letter. This letter originated in Hong Kong, okay, and it was sent to France via British packet service, via the Suez route all the way up to Southampton, and then forwarded from England into France under Article 12. It says colonies and countries, Article 13. I'm sorry, not 12. Article 12 was for Canada under this letter bill. Article 13 was from other countries. And Article 13 had a 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce bulk rate, which is equivalent to 40 pence divided by 4. The British portion was then only 10 pence. And 10 pence plus the French internal of 5 pence, you see a total postage due of 15 decimes. So this was all well and good, but then we come to the letter bill in May. Well, it started in March, but the letter bill actually came out in May of 1852. And we can see again, there's a change in the letter bills, plus there's now a few more categories, a few more entries on the letter bill. And normally, the only 2 articles that ever received accountancy markings in the past were for those from colonies and overseas countries and Jamaica and the Canadian provinces. But in 1848, there was a need for a special category in the letter bill for via Panama mails, because now there was a new rate introduced, 5 shillings 4 pence per ounce for letters exchanged via Panama. There was a rate of 7 shillings 4.5 pence established for letters exchanged from the West Coast of Mexico and California sent via Panama, and also for letter bills and so on. But still, we only had the accountancy markings for colonies and Jamaica. On the other hand, now we had exchange of letters sent from the European countries and other overseas countries sent via France to Great Britain. Okay, these are letters going the other way. And so now we have all these different categories on the letter bill that weren't there before. And so now things were becoming pretty complicated. We only had 2 letter bills. We only had, 2 accountancy markings that were being used to designate these various entries on the letter bill. And it quickly became apparent that something needed to be done. So it didn't take the French and the British very long to conclude that the current and future additions and adjustments to the Franco-British Convention were always going to result in modifications to the letter bills, and that the continual changes in accountancy markings and addition of new accountancy markings would be required to match the appropriate article numbers. So in May of 1852, E.J. Thayer, the Director General of the French Post, suggested that the British apply distinguishing stamps to all classes of unpaid correspondence sent from the United Kingdom to France. Okay. Well, initially that proposal was rejected by the British. They thought it would take, too much work for their clerks, for which there, as they say, there was neither time nor force to put that into effect. But eventually they must have changed their minds. For on the 17th of August, 1852, there is an entry in the President's Order Book, the British President's Order Book, that states it has been decided to use new stamps on the correspondence to and through France instead of those now in use, okay? Instead of the Colonies Article 12 and Canada in Article 13, or just vice versa. So the new stamps have been left with the President and are to be used on and from the 18th instance, okay? For 18 August 1852, these new accountancy markings were to be placed into use. But the new hand stamps, the new accountancy markings, were completely different from those previously used. First of all, they didn't refer to any specific article on the letter bill, but instead they gave a direct indication of the bulk rate of exchange. And here we see the new accountancy markings that were introduced. And here's the old letter bill from 1852. The bulk exchange rates haven't changed. The article numbers remain as they were, although now they're no longer associated with the accountancy markings. Accountancy markings directly give the exchange rate. Here we see from Jersey and Guernsey, they would have received on unpaid letters the GB 6p marking. That was the bulk exchange rate for unpaid letters from Jersey and Guernsey sent to France. The 3 shilling 4p outright exchange rate was, that marking would be applied to letters from colonies and overseas countries. 4 shillings from Jamaica and Canadian provinces. 5 shillings and 4p for letters sent via Panama. And while originally the letter bill showed 7 shillings 4.5p for letters sent from the west coast of Mexico via Panama, but between the time that this letter bill was made and between the times these accountancy markings were established, that exchange rate had dropped from 7 shillings 4.5p to 6 shillings 5p. So these markings were entered into the Registry of Steel Impressions, as I said, on 16 August 1852, and they were intended to be used beginning on the 18th of August. Well, there was a problem in that initially there was much confusion associated with these new markings, okay? The French requested the use of accountancy markings for unpaid mail only, okay? But the British also introduced similar hand stamps for use on prepaid mail, which again caused confusion. And you'll see when we get to the description of the letters that maybe half of them were incorrectly rated. And I mean, they're just, I have a feeling that there was no socialization of these markings with the French. The British proofed them, if you will, on August 16th, and by August 18th, they were being used. So when letters arrived in France, I don't think they really knew what to do with them. I mean, they were used to the old, colonies in Article 12 and colonies in Article 13 accountancy markings, but now they have these that are, completely different. So anyhow, France, and maybe England too, but between the two countries, I think there was a good bit of displeasure with the markings. And so much so that on the 25th of August, 1852, orders were issued to the London Foreign Office to discontinue the new system of stamping, which was brought into operation on the 18th, and to revert to the hand stamps that heretofore were used for letters sent to France. So these new accountancy markings were only authorized for a very short 8-day period between 18 and 25 August 1852. And in a sense, even though they were only used for a short time, they really were precursors to the accountancy markings that were introduced under the next Franco-British Postal Convention that went into effect on the 1st of January, 1857. And we'll take a look at those later. So just to review, the August 1852 experimental accountancy markings contained the following. One marking for showing a 10 pence exchange rate on letters sent from Malta to French office in Alexandria. Here's an entry of 1 shilling 8 pence, which was established as a bulk rate for unpaid letters sent to France from the British or the French offices in Alexandria. And unfortunately, no examples of either of these two accountancy markings have been reported during this 8-day period in August of 1852. And here we have an accountancy marking that was established for mail, unpaid mail from the Channel Islands to France. And you can see that the exchange rate here was 6 pence per ounce. And then under Article 14 of the letter bills, we saw that the exchange rate from France to France from all British colonies and undesignated overseas countries was 3 shillings 4 pence per ounce. And the following accountancy marking were prepared for use on such mail. So to date, we only know of 4 letters bearing this accountancy marking. The earliest examples passed through London Foreign Office on the 18th of August, and it actually shows 2 strikes of the accountancy markings. So here is that letter. Unfortunately, it's an envelope of unknown origin, so we really don't know where it originated. But we can surmise, and it's pretty sure, that it was carried to England as a ship letter aboard one of the British mail steamships. And when it reached London, it went to the London Foreign Office, okay, and they applied this 3 GB, 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce exchange rate. And as mentioned earlier, this rate was for unpaid letters sent from British colonies and all undesignated overseas countries. Well, they didn't know the origin of this letter, so this letter was placed under the undesignated overseas countries file. It was struck with the accountancy marking, and it was sent to France. It's unusual because this was basically on the first day, actually arrived in, it was processed on the first day of these markings in London, but it didn't arrive until France until the next day. There's a 19 August entry marking. And the French correctly rated it. They recognized the 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce bulk rate. So the British got 10 pence, and France internal postage at this time was 5 decimes. So the total postage due was 15. Now, the other unusual thing about this letter is that these markings were applied in red ink. According to the instructions, the accountancy markings applied to unpaid letters were to be struck in black ink. Those accountancy markings associated with prepaid letters were to be struck in red. Well, this being processed on the first day that these markings were placed into use, it may not seem unusual that they messed up the colors, but anyhow, these were applied in red ink. And the other unusual thing is this black marking. Normally, prior to 1852, letters that were unpaid letters that were sent to Great Britain, sent via Great Britain to France from British colonies and undesignated countries, received, the colonies in Article 12 or colonies in Article 13 accountancy marking, whichever was in use at that time. And occasionally, the London Foreign Office failed to apply those accountancy markings. And so when they got to France, France realized that they should have been exchanged at the 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce rate. So they struck their own exchange marking or accountancy markings. It says article, this doesn't show up very well, but it says article 13. Okay, so this letter would have been exchanged under article 13 of the letter bill at 3 shillings 4 pence per ounce. And so maybe that's why this thing was rated correctly. I think the French saw these markings, weren't necessarily sure what they meant, but they knew that this letter was being exchanged at this exchange rate, and therefore they marked it correctly with postage due. And here we have another letter. This letter originated probably in Canton, China, and was sent via Hong Kong by British packets to France. When it got to the London Foreign Office, they applied the GB 3 shilling 4 pence market, again, 2 strikes, but this time in black ink, which was correct. And on arrival in France, it was correctly rated again for 15 decimes postage due. Now this is just a folded partial letter sheet. So again, the actual origin is not known, but there's a ship letter Victoria hand stamp over here, which was usually applied on incoming ship letters into Hong Kong. And the majority of these markings that we know of came from the Canton area of China. So perhaps that's where this originated. We'll probably never know. And the third letter that we know of was this star-shaped accountancy marking originated in Portugal. It was sent from Lisbon to Great Britain and then forwarded to France at 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce exchange rate. Now the problem with this letter is whatever the postal clerk in France thought, they were confused by only seeing this exchange marking, and they rated this letter as an unpaid double weight letter from Great Britain, not from Portugal, and not exchanged at the 3 shilling 4 pence per ounce rate. And instead it was marked for a collection of 16 decimes, which was 2 times the 8 decime unpaid letter rate, as if the letter had originated in England. So now we see one of the letters where France failed to recognize the new accountancy marking and treated it as something that it shouldn't be. And here we have the fourth known letter with the star-shaped accountancy marking. And this letter originated in New York. It never entered the US mails, but was taken by the Swartz local post, probably carried it directly to the docks and placed it aboard the letter bag on the Cunard steamship Europa. From there, it was carried to England, and when it got to London, it was taken out of the letter bag, but there's no US postal marking here. There's this unusual stamp, which they probably hadn't ever seen before. So they really didn't know what to do with this letter. So they just said, okay, it came from an undesignated overseas country, applied the accountancy markings, and forwarded it to France. Well, France, this letter was actually addressed to Baden. Okay, so France had to decide what they were going to do with this letter. And they did send it to Baden, but unfortunately, it was treated as an unpaid letter from France, not as an unpaid letter from England, and not as an unpaid letter from some undesignated overseas country. So again, there was a confusion, and this letter was rated for only a collection of 20 kreuzer, which was far less than the amount of postage that England was debiting to France under this accountancy marking. Okay, moving on then, we have unpaid letters from Canada and Jamaica, but mostly from the Canadian provinces that were sent to France at the 4 shillings per ounce accountancy mark, 4 shillings per ounce exchange rate. And this is the accountancy marking that was applied to such letters. And to date, we only know of 2 letters with this accountancy markings. They were both carried to England aboard the Cunard steamship Europa, the same as the last letter we saw from New York. These entered the mails, and it was only on this voyage of the Cunard steamship that these exchange markings would be replied. For this was the only British steamship that brought mails in from the Canadian provinces during the short period that these experimental markings were in use. And these letters were rated for a collection of 17 decimes, just like we showed before for letters under the Canada and article accountancy markings. That was a combination of the 5 decimes per 7.5 grams French internal postage, plus the 12 decimes per 7.5 gram fee to England, which was 1/4 of the 4 shillings per ounce exchange rate. So here we see these 2 letters, both originated in Montreal on August 8th, 1852. Sent to different destinations within France. Both received the GB 4 shilling per ounce accountancy markings, weekly struck, which is unusual because, like I said, these were the only sailing. This was the only sailing where those markings were ever used. So I'm just surprised they weren't better struck than this, but these are the only 2 that we have. And both were rated for a collection of 17 decimes upon arrival in France. Well, back in September of 1848, there was new entries on the letter bills that governed the mails from the west coast of Central and South America, as well as other Pacific origins, that were sent to France via the Panama route. And these letters were to be exchanged at a 5 shilling 4 pence per ounce rate. Now, initially, the London Foreign Office applied just the following hand stamp to such letters. Just says Panama Transit. That's all it said. There was no reference of this marking to an article on the letter bill. It was just Panama Transit. So in August of 1852, however, now that translated into this accountancy marking that actually showed the exchange rate, 5 shilling 4 pence per ounce. But to date, no examples of this accountancy marking have been reported. And I believe the reason why was because the steamship Magdalena arrived at Southampton on 17 August 1852, and it carried the bi-monthly mails from both the West Indies, and it also carried the via Panama mails. So these letters arrived one day before the new accountancy markings were to be placed into use. So unless there was a delay in the processing of these letters in London, my guess is that we may never see an example of this accountancy marking, because by the time the next steamship arrived carrying the via Panama mails, these experimental accountancy markings had already been discontinued. And here we see a letter sent from Tacna, Peru. It was sent by Pacific Steam Navigation steamship to Panama, and then by the Royal Mail steamships to England. And it was forwarded to France at the correct 5 shilling 4 pence per ounce bulk rate and rated for a collection of 21 decimes upon delivery. However, as we can see, the London backstamp on this letter was 17 August, 1852, one day before the experimental accountancy markings were to be introduced. It bears, difficult to see, but here in red, it says Panama Transit, that's its marking. And so if all the via Panama mails were handled the same way on the same day, then there's a good chance we may never see the GB 5 shilling 4 pence per ounce accountancy marking. Well, under Article 17 of the letter bills, the exchange rate on unpaid letters sent to France from the west coast of Mexico and the United States was initially established at 7 shillings, 4.5 pence per ounce. But as I mentioned, by the time the new accountancy markings were entered into, that exchange rate had been reduced to 6 shillings, 5 pence per ounce. And the following accountancy marking was prepared for use. Well, again, the only possible way that such letters could have reached London around this time was on the steamship Magdalena, just as we saw before. Okay, the Magdalena carried the West Indies mail and it carried the via Panama mails, of which letters exchanged at this exchange rate would have been included. But since there's a good chance that all these letters were processed by the London Foreign Office on the 17th, one day before the experimental accountancy markings would have been implemented, it's doubtful, I think, that we will ever find one of these in the future. Okay, now we have a set of accountancy markings that were used on prepaid mail from Great Britain. As I mentioned, the French only requested mails or accountancy markings to be used on unpaid, but the British said, well, why not? Well, as long as we're applying them to paid mails, we might as well apply them to unpaid mails. We might as well apply them to paid mails with the correct exchange rates shown. So these are the letters that the British applied to prepaid letters sent to France or to destinations beyond France. They also made 2 for printed matter, 4 centimes and 10 centimes. So we can take a look at those quickly. Unfortunately, we don't have many items to show, but the exchange rate associated with newspapers, other types of printed matter sent from Great Britain to France, was established at 10 centimes per item. And here's the accountancy marking that was prepared for use on such printed matter. Again, no examples have been reported during this 8-day period in August 1852. The exchange rate associated with newspapers and other types of printed matter sent via France to Spain and Portugal was established at 4 centimes per item. And those items were prepaid only to the French border, so with Spain. And this is the accountancy marking that was introduced, but again, no examples are known. Now, from the beginning of the 1843 Franco-British Convention, a 2 franc per 30 gram exchange rate was established on all prepaid letters, regardless of origin, forwarded from Great Britain to France or to countries beyond France, when payment only to the French border was allowed. Okay, and this exchange rate was still in effect during the August 1852 period of interest, and the following accountancy marking was prepared for use on such mail. Now, to date, 7 letters bearing this accountancy marking have been reported on prepaid letters within the United Kingdom, and all but 1 were addressed to destinations within France. By far, out of all the August 1852 experimental accountancy markings, this is the most numerous known. And we'll look at some of these. Here's an early letter sent from Ireland to France. It was prepaid at the correct 10 pence rate for a single weight letter. And when it got to England, it was sent to the London Foreign Office, and they applied the FR 2 franc marking. Okay, so out of the total 10 pence prepayment, the British credited France. Now, these are markings applied to prepaid letters, credited France 2 francs per ounce, or basically 5 pence per quarter ounce for a single weight letter. And here's an unusual letter. This was this was an unpaid letter that was sent from Boston to an agent in London. It's been crossed out, but London agent. And it was sent unpaid aboard an American steamship. And the US debited England 21 cents under the current US-British convention. So when it got to England, it was delivered to the London foreign agent, and he paid 1 shilling. There's the 1 shilling marking here, 1 shilling. And whether he opened the letter and reread it and read it, I don't know. But he readdressed it to the same addressee, care of the Poirier brothers in Paris. So he just turned this lever around in reverse and readdressed it to Mr. Henry Woods, care of the Poirier brothers in Paris. But now underneath here is a London paid marking. He paid 10 pence for this letter. No, this was a double weight letter. He paid 1 shilling 3 pence. Okay, so he paid 5 pence for the British and 2 times 5 pence for the French. So that would have been 15 pence or 1 shilling 3 pence. Okay, and the London Foreign Office applied the FR 2 franc marking, indicated that the letter was prepaid to Paris and that France would have received, on the letter bill, France would have received 5 pence per 7.5 grams, or 10 pence in this case. But of course, the clerks in France didn't recognize this marking, okay? And again, this was fairly early. This passed through the London Foreign Office on 19 August, so on the second day. And they, again, just treated this as a letter from Great Britain, but they treated it as a totally unpaid letter from Great Britain, and they charged 16 decimes postage due, 2 times the 8 decime rate as a double weight letter. So the sender of this letter paid 1 shilling 3 pence, and the addressee had to pay another 16 decimes just to get this letter. So you can see there was still a lot of confusion involved. Now here we see a letter again from Ireland, and this passed through the London Foreign Office on the 18th. And it was prepaid, like in the previous letter, 1 shilling 3 pence. So this must have been a letter that weighed between 1/4 and 1/2 ounce. Now this letter was paid, it was addressed to Spain, but this letter was only paid to the Franco-Spanish border. There was no way at this time that you could prepay a letter via Spain to destination. No, there was no way you could prepay a letter via France to a destination in Spain. So the most you could do was pay it to the border. And then postage due on arrival was 13.5 reals, which was quite a large amount of money at this time. And another letter, sorry, it's not very sharp. This is a prepaid letter from Canada. It originated in Quebec in August 1852. And you can see the crown circle paid at Quebec marking. It was prepaid 5 shilling 3 pence in sterling, or 5 shilling 10 pence in Canadian currency. And when it got to England, they indicated that they considered this letter to be prepaid. This was on the 23rd of August, 1852. And they forwarded it to France. There's the 24th August entry marking, and the London Foreign Office also applied the FR 2 franc marking, indicating that the letter was fully paid and that French would have been credited 2 francs per ounce for the prepayment. Yep. So it looks like there was no confusion on the French part at this time because of the London paid marking and French BD marking, and everything looked kosher to them. So there's no postage due marking, even though one might expect because of the way they handled other prepaid letters. So the other accountancy markings that were issued by Great Britain on letters to destinations beyond France. We have one where the exchange rate of 2 francs 40 centimes per ounce was established for rates mostly for the European countries, all the German states, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, and so on, as well as free cities of Frankfurt, Hamburg, Bremen, and Lubeck. Again, no examples have been reported. And we also have an accountancy marking set up for prepaid letters sent from Great Britain to the Kingdom of Sardinia. And these were exchanged at the 3 franc 25 centime per 30 gram rate. And I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but it's been cut off here on my screen, but they issued the FR 3 franc 25 centime accountancy markings for use. And we know at least one letter that actually shows this marking. So this letter was originated in London on 19 August 1852. It was prepaid 1 shilling 9 pence. Okay. And that amount was a combination of 2 times the French postage, which was 3 franc 25 divided by 4 is nominally 8 decimes. And a double rate would have been 16 decimes. And the British would have been 5 pence. So that would have been 21 pence total prepayment, or 1 shilling 9 pence. And as you can see, it was marked paid, and there was no postage due on arrival in Nice. Nice at this time was within the Kingdom of Sardinia, not France. Now we see that there was a 4 franc per 30 gram bulk rate established for prepaid letters sent from Great Britain to any of the French offices in the Mediterranean. And to date, we have no examples of this FR 4 franc accountancy markings have been reported. But one letter, this letter is known from 1852, was sent from Scotland, from Glasgow. It was paid 2 shilling 1 pence. And it passed through the London Foreign Office on, on the 19th of August, 1852. And there must have been some confusion even on the British part as to what to do with it. I mean, from the standpoint of how it should be marked. As a collector, I wish it would have been marked, with the FR 4 franc, but it wasn't. It was just marked paid again. But it wasn't actually exchanged with France until the 25th of August. So it sat in the London Foreign Office from the 19th to nominally the 24th, and then it was finally sent to France. And then by France, it went by French packet to Beirut in Syria, and then from there to Aleppo. And it was prepaid the correct amount, it's just that it doesn't show the FR4 franc accountancy marking. Well, there were two other markings intended for use on prepaid mail. The 4 franc 40 centime per 30 gram rate was established on prepaid letters sent from Great Britain to Tuscany, Parma, Modena, Roman states, Greece, Ionian Islands, and also some of the other German states or principalities or kingdoms, Hanover and Saxony, duchies of Mecklenburg-Schwerin and so forth, as well as Austria, Serbia, Poland, and Russia. But again, no examples have ever been reported. And the last of the accountancy markings on prepaid letters sent from Great Britain via France to Moldavia, Wallachia, and European Turkey. And that was at the rate of 6 francs, 80 centimes per 30 grams. Although this accountancy marking was created and presumably placed into use at the London Foreign Office, no examples have been reported to date. So the last set of accountancy markings that were introduced were on mail, prepaid mail from Malta. Okay. And basically the prepaid rates on letters from Malta to France or to destinations beyond France were, for printed matter, the rates were nominally 5 centimes greater than those rates that were established for similar items sent from Great Britain to the same destination. So here we have the exchange marking that was established for printed matter sent from Great Britain to France, 10 centimes. The exchange rate for printed matter sent from Malta to France was 5 centimes more, or 15 centimes per 40 grams, or per item at this time. The same with letters. The letters, prepaid letters from Great Britain to France, 2 francs. The exchange rate on prepaid letters sent from Malta to France, 3 shillings, 1 shilling more. From Great Britain to the Sardinian states, 3 franc 25. From Malta to Sardinian states, 4 franc 25. So, unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, the experimental accountancy markings were entered into the Register of Steel Impressions on 16 August, but they weren't placed for use in the Foreign Office until 18 August. The markings intended for prepaid letters sent from Malta were first sent to Southampton and placed aboard the P&O Line steamship Sultan. That departed England on the 20th of August and arrived in Malta on the 30th of August. But since the order to suspend the use of these experimental accountancy markings was issued on 25 August, and the markings didn't arrive until the 30th of August, it's highly probable that these markings were never placed into use at Malta, and to date, no usages have been reported. So we have a summary. Use of the experimental accountancy markings only during the 8-day period between 18 and 25 August 1852, after which the older accountancy markings were reintroduced. There was certainly an amount of confusion on the use and interpretation of these hand stamps. And I believe in addition to the time, the extra time and manpower required to apply the markings to a wider variety of mail, I have a feeling that that probably led to their demise. Now, as we noted, prior to the introduction of these experimental accountancy markings, there literally were only 2 accountancy markings that were applied, those from Canada and its provinces, and those from undesignated overseas countries and British colonies. So They only they only had to apply one of those two markings, if at all. And now we had, a whole range of hand stamps that had to be applied with the correct rates and everything. And I have a feeling that took too much time and was too confusing for everyone. So, but whatever, for their shortcomings, the basic design of these experimental accountancy markings must have made some type of favorable impression on both the British and the French postal authorities, for they would serve as prototypes for the accountancy markings developed for use under the next, or the 1857 Franco-British Convention. And it's worthy to note that to date, only 14 letters showing these experimental accountancy markings have been reported. But I would be happy to receive information on any other examples that that other people can come up with. That would be a great help to me. And here's the kind of a proof impression sheet of the British accountancy markings that were introduced for use under the 1857 Franco-British Convention. And you can see they're somewhat similar to the ones we have observed as the experimental markings that now contain just the GB and the actual rate of exchange. Okay, there's a whole slew of them here because by now there are a lot of exchange categories on the letter bills and many different exchange rates. And now, obviously, you can see these are just for letters, and then down here we have the exchange rate for printed matter. Okay, the exchange rate of 1 franc per kilogram. These are for printed matter. And here's a partial proof impression sheet of the French markings that were introduced under the 1857. And again, now we see FR for France and the bulk exchange rate expressed in French currency. No longer were they identified as according to the articles in the letter bill, but just as with the experimental accountancy markings, they now show the bulk exchange rate. Again, for letters, and then these for printed matter. Well, that's it. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll be happy to answer them if I can.
Jeff, you want to stop sharing?
I can do that.
Thank you.
This is Richard Aspen. Sorry, my camera's not working. I don't know why yet. Jeff, very early in your presentation, you had a cover with a local stamp, a local post.
Yes, it had the Schwartz stamp on it.
Yeah, Schwartz.
Well, there was one with the New York Postmaster Provisional, and it's not really a local, but it wasn't really a government issued stamp either. So I'm not sure which one.
The reason I mentioned that I looked it up and I did a quick lookup, and
this one?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Schwartz Dispatch. That's a New York local.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
New York City City local.
Okay, I just want that's a very interesting one for those local post collectors.
Yeah, it really is. This was in the John Boker's collection many years ago, and he had quite an accumulation of U.S. carriers and locals. And
yeah,
like I said, this letter never really entered the U.S. mail, so I think it's my impression that they opened this letter trying to figure out where it originated, and someone had actually written inside. It says, "This is not a stamp." so the British or whoever opened it and wrote it obviously didn't even recognize what this was.
Right.
And I think the only choice that they had was to forward it to France from an undesignated overseas countries. I mean, they knew it came into England on a ship, but they
Yeah.
had no idea what its origin was.
Well, that's certainly a marvelous combination cover, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I was happy to get it just because it had the accountancy marking on, and not that I could care less about the local, but I mean,
Yeah,
my choice was to get it because of the
right.
accountancy marking.
And Jeff, you said they collected 20 Kreutzer. I see the crayon 14 on there.
14/6. There's a red is 14, and there's a slash, and it's 6. And that here's the slash. You can hardly see it. Okay, so the total was 20 Kreutzer, and let's see, 3 Kreutzer was only 10 centimes. So 20 Kreutzer would have been less than 70 centimes. Okay. And
Right.
yet the British debited France 10 pence or 100 centimes. So France lost big on this because they didn't know how to rate it. They sent it to Baden, and they only got 14 pence back. The Baden portion was 6 Kreutzer, and the French portion was 14 Kreutzer. So, but that's one of the problems when you introduce sometimes these markings and they're not socialized. They show up and the clerks don't know what to do with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happened on a lot of these letters.
Jeff, this is Frank Bloom.
Yes.
You're correct in that it would never have entered the U.S. Postal Service because at that time, U.S. Postal Service was only between cities. So if it was only in New York going to the ship, it would never have entered U.S. Postal Service.
No, but you could have paid 5 cents.
They wouldn't have because there was no delivery fee. There's no fee inside the thing. They handed it to the Swartz, which is a private delivery company.
Right.
And they took it to the ship.
Right.
So there would have been nothing for the U.S. Postal Service to ever have handled it. They would never have handled it.
No, they could have. No.
Well, they wouldn't have in this case because you had a Schwartz local post doing everything.
Yeah, but
there was nothing in there. There was nothing in New York for them to take it unless they took it to the U.S. Post Office in New York.
Right.
To take it to the ship.
Right.
And this didn't. They used a private delivery service.
I understand that. Yes, you're right. But if you had this letter originally and you didn't entrust it to the Swartz Dispatch, you could have put a 5-cent stamp on there and dropped it in any post office, and the U.S. Post Office would have delivered it to the next ship. You don't know which ship it would have been.
Yeah, you won't. You have no thing. This way, they probably designated what ship they wanted it on.
Maybe so.
And told the Swartz carrier, take it to the ship.
Yeah. Well, my guess
it was cheaper than the 5. It was cheaper.
Yeah, it's only 2 cents
than using the Postal Service.
Right.
So that's why a lot of those local posts were working and doing so well in New York, Philadelphia. The other thing, a lot of that was just in-town mail.
Absolutely.
A whole lot cheaper than the Postal Service.
Yeah, they definitely provided a needed service. And like you say, I think they did very well initially.
Until the Postal Service decided to step on their toes.
That's right. I think when they went into effect, those services were allowed because as long as they could say, I'm providing a service that the U.S. Post Office does not provide, I'm allowed to do what I want. I can charge any fee I want, and I can carry letters, to the ship, or I can bring letters from the ship, and then like my guess is that when the U.S. or the Postal Service decided that, hey, these guys are making profit, maybe we should step in and provide the same service somehow, then.
Yeah, that's usually what happened is that because originally there was no in-town delivery service. You had to go to the post office to pick up your mail.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just the larger cities actually had the carrier service.
And so this one, those private messenger services, and they still exist, but now they don't issue stamps and do everything.
Well, I guess there's some of those small islands up in New York or wherever it is, they have their own stamps, and they,
Well,
they provide a plane that takes mail out to these little islands and drops it off. But
even
yeah.
these little, even in big cities, there's still messenger services.
Oh yeah,
And they don't do stamps or anything. They don't mark the mail. And
right,
it can be carried outside of the mails.
right. You're right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for those comments. Yeah.
Anybody else? I know we had some in the chat section here. I think this was Tom Mara, didn't have his last name, saying that he thought the manuscript markings were centimes and not décimes. I don't agree with that. I'm with you, Jeff, that those were décimes.
No, first of all, if they'd be centime markings, they would have been applied in red ink.
And they would have had a little C.
Well, yeah, but not always. But that obviously, if the centime rates would have been for printed matter, and all of these are letters.
Yep.
And so the postage due markings would have been applied in black ink, and they would represent decimes, not centimes. So.
Yep.
So I don't know if he had a specific one in mind.
No, he didn't mention it. He just thought he was making a general comment.
Oh, here's one. Y divided by 4.
Right.
Okay. Well, in all these exchange rates, they were based on a bulk rate, either of 30 grams or 1 ounce. But when they got to destination, the clerks had to rate them as individual letters. And so what happened was they took the bulk exchange rate, let's say it was 3 shillings 4 pence per ounce, and they would divide that by 4. That would be the rate for a 7.5 gram letter. If you were in France, that would be the rate for a 7.5 gram letter. So 3 shillings 4 pence would have been 40 pence, divided by 4 is 10 pence. Okay, so an unpaid letter from Great Britain or from anywhere to France, exchanged at the 3 shillings 4 pence ground rate. 10 pence of that would have had to have been credited back to France. To England, sorry. So that's why they divided the bulk rates by 4 in order to get the rate for a single weight letter. I didn't hear that. Was that? Oh,
I think that was background noise.
okay. So what else do we?
Jeff, this is Richard Aspens again. One more general question to the whole audience. In the post offices that were handling this mail, did the clerks have a balance scale, or did they just do it by experience to get the weight?
No, they literally were supposed to. Now, what happened was this came over in a bag of mail, and within that bag were these letter bills, and these letter bills had columns. So many single weight letters, and they might put 300 single weight letters, and they would weigh them by bulk. Okay, and then what happened in the end is that they had to justify the amount of money collected, total money collected, and they also had to justify how much was being credited back to like Great Britain if it was a letter into France. Okay, now they didn't necessarily have to measure each letter individually. Okay, but if the totals didn't come out, in other words, if the letter bill from England said, I'm sending you 420 single weight letters, and you didn't have 400, and you didn't have an amount that was equal to 420 single weight letters, then you'd have to check. And I think most of the time, like you said, they could look at a letter and tell if it was single weight or double weight. And those they would have to check if the balance didn't come out right.
Okay.
That's usually what happened. Now, I wasn't alive back in 1852, so I'm not exactly sure, but from what I've read about how these things were handled, that's typically what was done. And you have to remember that, I mean, these letters would come into the exchange office or whatever, and there'd be thousands of them,
Oh,
in
sure.
one day.
Yeah.
And their job was to get it out the same day as best they could. So they didn't have time to weigh every single letter. They weighed things in bulk. Okay. So they took all the letters that were on the letter bill, supposedly that said they were single weight letters. They weighed them in bulk. They divided that by the number of letters. And if that didn't come out to be, less than 7.5 grams per letter, then they had a problem. So I think that's basically what they did. Okay. Similar postage due markings on stamped 1860s to 70s that I have seen represent centimes. Is it different for unpaid? Well, I don't know what that is. If it's if the postage due is represented in centimes, it generally means that it's printed matter, not letters. Okay. Now there are exceptions to that. Unpaid mail from even paid mail from Spain to France after 1860 sometimes has a big 5C hand stamp on it. And then that was an extra charge that the French put on for a 5 centime extra charge. Okay, but in general, if you see a letter with a 5 or a 10 or something like that, and if it's in black ink, it generally means that the postage due is 10 decimes or 5 decimes or whatever. And if you see a wrapper or something like that, or newspaper that comes through and it has a postage due marking in red ink, that generally means that postage due is in centimes and generally is associated with printed matter.
Yeah,
I don't know if that helps answer the question, but unless I can see a picture of it, I can't really, tell you for sure that what you have is centimes. Or
Daryl Templer has asked, were forwarding agents involved in the process?
Well, yeah, I showed you the one letter from New York, okay, that was sent to a forwarding agent in London, and then they turned around and readdressed the letter and sent it to France. So from that standpoint, forwarding agents could be involved. But normally, for what I showed today, it was basically just the exchange between the British post office and the French post office, or to destinations beyond if that was the case. But so forwarding agents generally were not involved once the letters either got to the British office and the French office. That part of the exchange was just done from postal agency to postal agency, not with forwarding agents.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions for Jeff? And if you would just leave this up on the screen for a little bit here, I have comments.
Sure.
That help me. So if nobody has any more questions for Jeff, which we can come back to if we do, next month in November, our meeting is early. I want to say it's the 18th. I don't have my calendar up at the moment, but it's a Sunday, and it's that weekend, 19th maybe.
20th, Sunday the 20th, Ken.
Yeah,
Sunday the 20th. Thank you, Larry. And our idea for that meeting is a show and tell in which we all participate. And I have found in doing this probably a dozen times since COVID started, that the best thing to do is ask you as a participant to scan something and send it to me with some words describing it. And the reason I like what's up on the screen here is a scan of that cover and the few words below it sent in an email. The scan as a JPG file rather than a PDF, although I can convert a PDF to a JPG. And then I'll put together a PowerPoint presentation. It will not have your name in it, but it will, as we go through this, as your item comes up on the screen, you'll have a chance to tell us about it. And if you have 2 or 3 items you would like to send in, that would be excellent, because I'm guessing that if we get a dozen people to participate and then each of us have 2 or 3 items, that will give us a program just about long enough. I will not include people's names, so you don't need to be concerned about disclosing that you own something other than orally when you're telling us about it. So that's our program for November, Sunday the 20th. And I will be traveling that day, so I'm asking Larry Rosenblum if he can host that for us. He and I are going to work out the technical details so that we can make the Zoom meeting happen the way it's supposed to. All right, Jeff, you can unshare now. We'll get all our smiling faces back up on our screen. Maybe I can do that. Here.
Yeah, I can see stop share.
There we
Okay.
go. I got it. All righty. So does anybody have any just general commentary, questions, things you want to talk about? Preferably related to France and Colonies Philately.
And this is Richard Asmus. I resent that global indexing example to you again for the journal for your consideration.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Clemens, I'll just warn you that I have a question and I'm going to send you a picture and ask if you can help me out with it. And yeah, somebody says bravo to, Elaine says this, bravo to Jeff for his presentation. It really is interesting stuff, and especially to pick a week when this was in effect and be able to show us all the material that exists. That's really cool, Jeff. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
And yep, I am going to turn off the recording.